Welcome to Packets and Bolts. Today is Monday, July 17th, 2023. This is Muskrat flying solo today. Dubstench and Mongoose will not be here, and we will not do listener emails today. This is a interview with Michal Horn. We've revisited Michal Horn to talk about Billy Meier and all the other recent, UFO situations and, lots and lots of stuff to go over since we last talked with Michal Horn. So since we haven't done an episode for a little while here, this will be an abbreviated episode. So no listener emails, no drink, although I am sipping on a little bit of Knob Creek rye today. But we will have another full-length episode, hopefully in the next few weeks. But Michal Horn, for those that don't remember, Michal Horn has over 40 years of experience as a science researcher. In 1986, Michal found previously unknown warnings about man-made climate change and global warming, also foretelling increased frequency and intensity of all forms of storms, blizzards, tsunamis, etc. The warnings, which were in the information he found in 1979, were originally published beginning in 1951 by a Swiss man named Billy Meier. Meier also first warned about the damage of the ozone layer from A-bomb explosions and about the connection between the extraction of petroleum and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, all of which were subsequently scientifically corroborated. This is the interview with Michal Horn that was previously recorded. Thank you, Michal Horn, for coming back on the show. It's been a while.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we wanted to originally get this going about maybe a year or so ago when the reports and everything were coming back into the news, and unfortunately we had some issues going on our side. But now there's a fresh round of reports coming back. In addition to the government interesting stories with the, I guess they're changing UFOs now to UAPs, which has been going on for a couple years now, I guess. But the report that they released, I guess, that says that there could be, we're not sure what it is, doesn't look to be extraterrestrial, but we can't rule it out. That was one finding. Then the fresh round of military, quote unquote, unusual sightings. Of course, all of the footage they released seemed to be low quality, not really able to tell anything. And then even Greer just put out a new press release. So yeah, there's just been a whole bunch of interesting stuff, and this seems to come up every so many months. I'm wondering what your take is on all of this.
Well, I think I sent you information pertaining to photographs that I discovered in a storage unit in Moab, Utah in 2020, when Billy Meier asked me to go and check and look into an archive that was being stored there. Mm-hmm. Did I send you that? Okay.
Yes.
So here's the thing, and I'm just gonna try to cut to the chase with this as much as I can. The development of alternative craft began terrestrially last century, somewhere around the 1920s. The acquisition of, let's say, some alternative type craft, well, I'm going to go back to the fact that during the Second World War, towards the end of it, the Nazis obtained some information for, I'm sorry, I've got a train coming through here, literally.
That's all right.
The Nazis obtained information that enabled them to build alternative type craft, which were only used very briefly towards the end of the Second World War. When the war ended, according to the information in the Meier contacts, the Allied powers, some of the countries, U.S., Great Britain, I think France, and I think even Russia, there's a number of countries that obtained either craft or they obtained plans for developing such things. Then you have the crashes at Roswell and other places. There have been a number of other crashes around the world, again, according to this material. What we are getting today is only more of the actual cover-up for the actual agenda, which is, it entails a number of things. The demonization of so-called aliens, making this into a focus on strange-looking little creatures, etc., to scare the public. The Roosevelt administration was behind the original radio recording of War of the Worlds. H.G. Wells was the author, and a prominent actor and producer of the time, Orson Welles, and they spelled their last names differently, was the person who performed the radio thing, both of whom did so under threat of death to them and their families if they did not carry this out, according to the information in the Meyer case. There's a lot of information about this stuff. Now, what we have today is more disinformation, more obfuscation, more scary stuff. I will simply say this for your audience. Stephen Greer is a grandstander and a showman who actually helps perpetuate the distraction. Greer himself can only refer to anecdotal other people's information and make a lot of claims, many of which are not true at all. He has no evidence. He brings forward no evidence. He brings forward people who, military people, who speak about, this craft. And I'll take this back to about right between 2004, 2006. Stephen Greer and I were on a panel, a discussion panel, public discussion panel at a UFO segment at what was called the Whole Life Expo in Los Angeles, I believe at the Sheraton Hotel. He had spoken, pardon me, I'm very hoarse up here. We're a little hot and dry in Arizona.
I bet.
Not as bad up here as it is, pardon me, down in Phoenix, but it still gets a little dry. So, Stephen Greer, and there were some other people on this panel, and he was sitting about, well, let's say there were maybe one or two people between me and Greer, and he finished speaking, and it was my turn, and I got up, and I actually turned to him, and I said to him, Stephen, I'd like to offer you all of the material you want from the Billy Meyer contacts, which are still ongoing in Switzerland. I said, it's very nice that you have all these wonderful people who come forward talking about these sightings, and they're very truthful. You have airline people, you have military people. The problem is they don't know what it is they're seeing, and most of what they're seeing is secret military craft at the time. Not all, but most of it. Mm-hmm. And I went on to say, I'd like you to have this material. You could save yourself a lot of trouble and cut to the chase. He would not even look in my direction. He would not respond. The reason he doesn't, people since and before then have written to Greer, you must talk about the Billy Meyer. They refuse to respond. And the reason they refuse to respond is that Greer knows that the Meyer case is singularly authentic, meaning there is one person on Earth with whom there have been ongoing face-to-face meetings for over 80 years. And that is a Swiss man named Billy Meyer, who has, for his trouble, thankfully survived 25 attempts on his life, kidnapping attempts on his children's lives. I have seen I've seen some evidence, of course, and I've also interviewed about 14 of the eyewitnesses just several months ago, and I haven't spoken to them since it happened. Two friends of mine were sitting with Meyer when another attempt was made in his life. To this day, the CIA-backed Swiss military flies incursions above Meyer's property, harassing them, trying to eavesdrop on things. They know this is going on. The reason you and most of the world doesn't know what's going on is because behind all of this stuff is the secret U.S. military agenda. Now, I'll just finish the story about finding photos. There were 24 boxes of archives from the late investigator Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens. The last box, there were 24 boxes, the last box on this weekend of going through things in Moab, Utah, there were some photographs sitting in the top of the box, and I looked at them real quickly. I saw a UFO, I saw an airplane. I thought, oh, this must be connected to the Mirage jet photos that Billy had taken in 1975 or 76. I sent everything off to him. And then I got a letter back saying, no, this is something different. These are not the Mirage photos. This set of photos was taken in June of 1981. They weren't taken by Billy. They were taken by Wendell Stevens secretly at Area 51. This is the information that they had at the time. And I don't have an update. I think it still stands. But the story behind them is kind of interesting because it was actually the first time we have seen. There have been 5 other photographers, but it's the first time we've ever literally had our hands on photographs taken by somebody else. And in this case, the lieutenant colonel, the retired Lieutenant Colonel Wendell Stevens, U.S. Air Force, who literally risked his life to be secretly on that property, photographing an interaction between a then top secret U.S. stealth plane. I have this freely on the blog. Well, it's pretty amazing because my webmaster was able to trace down, there's a guy, I think his name was Ray Farley. He was the actual test pilot of that craft. We have photographs of that craft, not only from these photos. I think there were 9 photos or so that we had, maybe 7 originals and a couple were copies. But we know it was that craft. And I had a photo expert formerly with Kodak. I sent him one of the photos and I said, please tell me what you can about the photo, but tell me what you can about the info on the back of the photo. So he said about the photo, well, this looked at this. These 2 objects are in this photograph at the same time. There's no photo montaging. An interesting thing is that there's some movement that's detectable from the stealth. The other object is stationary. And he went on to talk about why he knew that and all this stuff. And then he said, as for the information on the back, and this is what I want to know, he says, this is Kodak information showing that these photographs were processed in the 1980s. Well, so the whole story comes together. I leave a message at the office of a representative, Andre Carson. This is, back shortly after I get all these things back, and I leave it, because I reach out to people all the time, scientists, people at NASA and other places. I reach out to journalists, alternative journalists, mainstream journalists. We do not get responses for various reasons because the narrative that the government wants promoted is what now even the alternative people follow suit with all this nonsense. So I left them a message saying I have photos of this interaction between a stealth, and a UFO. Strangely enough, about a week later, my phone rings. It's a woman. Her name was Amy Munch. She said that she was, and I saw when she sent me an email follow-up, at that time she was a national security advisor to this committee. Would you be so kind as to send us copies of those photos? We'd really like to see them. I sent a copy. She said, thank you, got them. I'll move them up the chain. That was the last I ever heard from them. They were censored. So the American people do not know that this whole bogus threat narrative, which I was calling out also even before that when Lou Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, these people are, for people who don't know, Lou Elizondo's quote unquote former intelligence operative, blah, 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 connected to, he joined forces along with Christopher Mellon with a guy named Tom DeLonge some, further years ago, to the Stars Academy, I think it was called, we're going to get the truth about US UFOs out. This is a whole intelligence operation. You insert these guys in, then they leave Tom DeLonge's thing, and they move out to now become, whistleblowers. Give me a break about UFOs. So I even have a video on my blog where there's another former Navy intelligence guy, Sean something or other, Sean Cahill, I think that's his name. He's in a car. I get this. They send it to me because I had put up a video online calling out Lou Elizondo, and Sean Cahill looks into the camera. He's holding a cell phone, and he doesn't say anything. He points to the side. The camera pans, or his cell phone pans, whatever it was. And there's Lou Elizondo sitting in the front seat while my video is playing the audio for my video is playing, calling him out, and then Lou Elizondo smiles and puts a thumbs up into the air. These people have utter contempt for anybody that's going to tell the truth about it, because they know that nobody's going to gain any traction. What will come of all this is rather disturbing. And so to say a thing like that in the midst of it, what do you mean will come of it? Mm-hmm. I'll continue just a little more, and then I'll explain what I mean by that. Those photos, as I said, were censored and suppressed. The charade goes on. But here's the thing. In 2015, I was in Switzerland, and I interviewed Billy for many times I've interviewed him. I have films about him out and all of that. And I asked him something about the so-called earth foreigners. It's a term that he began using some years ago, and he said this refers to several groups, not the people that he is allegedly in contact with. This refers to several groups of non-originally terrestrial people, beings, that are here and that have been here for a very long time, observing things, and who are based under the earth. And we went into this a little bit. He calls, I'm not going to get all with the earth foreigners and how many groups and all. Suffice it to say there are a number of different parties, and one of them is a substantially sized party, and Billy went in to say their craft are and have been seen widely around the earth. So other than secret military, the main craft that are seen are from these people. And I said, well, is this a group, a small group down there? He says, and he leans forward, he says, no, it's a state, literally a state.
Really?
And there's more, these people are the descendants, if I understand this correctly, of extraterrestrials who came to Earth a very long time ago, who stationed themselves in Egypt and also in South and Central America. And interestingly enough, there are very clear sculptures and artifacts of them. And what distinguishes those people, because Billy uses another term called the long skulls. If you've ever seen a sculpture of Queen Nefertiti, mm-hmm. If you do, you look, and when you look from the side, the skull extends backwards at an angle that protrudes significantly more than the so-called normal Earth people's skull. These things are in museums all over the world. This isn't like the myths of the little gray guys all over the place and little green guys and whatever else. These are real people who have been and are still here. They are based under the earth. They don't contact people. They observe a lot, and some of what our government may have fired on have been their craft, and that is a very bad move to make. They are far advanced from us technologically, far advanced. They can pass in and out from their underground bases to above Earth and fly around. Again, they've never shown hostile intent. And people, this is just information. People can take it or leave it. But here's the thing. And I cut to the chase on it because most people today are, when you look at the news and the weather reports, it's like, oh, well, look what's happening now and all this stuff. Billy Meyer, beginning in the 1940s as a boy, is the first person on record to be specifically warning about unnatural, man-made, global warming, climate change, the increase in frequency and intensity for the coming times, which of course we're now in, of all forms of storms and blizzards, earthquakes, seaquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. They have foretold specific locations for specific earthquakes and specific volcanic activity. We have charted over 250 specific, error-free examples of what I refer to as prophetically accurate scientific, geopolitical, environmental, medical, and economic information, error-free, never redacted, retracted, corrected, withdrawn, nothing. Always accurate. And that includes what's happening now with the increased temperatures, of course. But things like we just had in the news tremendous upheaval in France, right?
Mm-hmm.
Billy Meyer specifically foretold it in 58 and beyond. And what comes from that, that is not over. France is going to fall to radical Islam from within. Now, in these prophecies and predictions, and let me say, stop me at any time because, I'm loaded for bear on this because of how important I feel it is to people to know what's really going on. We are being played so badly, primarily by the, military agenda, the intelligence
Mm-hmm.
community, all this stuff. And we're not conspiracy theorists. There's no theories in the Meyer context. Meyer foretold Paris riots, the burning, all these things long ago. He foretold things like, in 1987, he foretells the movement of Russian troops to a place called Arkhangelsk, northern Russia, Siberia. In the middle of this whole long document on very specific prophecies and predictions, which, by the way, included the destruction of the World Trade Center. So I'm reading this stuff back in 2002, and what's this Arkhangelsk business? And I look it up, and here it's a place, northern Russia. It's about 9 years later, there's an article that the Russians have just moved their troops to Arkhangelsk. And I'm thinking, this is kind of strange. I even called up a guy I'd known for 50 years who was a skeptic on this material. And he said, come on over and bring your camera. This is okay. And he's a retired physicist and physician. He says, look, I was in the military. I know what Arkhangelsk, under cloud cover year round. I've flown over to other people. Well, this Meyer material, this man is not crazy. Our government should be listening to him and listening to him now. He's not calling for destruction. He's calling for peace, and he's pointing out things that are very dangerous to us. Now, the other piece that was in there, among them, 200 more other pieces, including the warnings about artificial intelligence, we can get to that. Arkhangelsk, situated closer to Scandinavia. And in this same document, Meyer speaks about the Russians are going to attack Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Now, I'm looking in news stuff back 10 years ago, 12 years ago, thinking, well, these are all neutral countries. I mean, there's no hostilities here between these countries. What would that be about? Never mind. Well, we now know. So not too long ago, Sweden and Norway, moved into towards membership in NATO,
Mm-hmm.
and Finland. Well, Finland hadn't been even involved in anything with NATO in 1987. Why is this information in here? And then further information about when the Russians then come across to intersect through Canada and Alaska when they come into America. And this is what also got my friend to say, come on over and bring your camera, because I'd sent him the whole document. There is so much warning as to what was at that time coming, which is now, quite frankly, pretty much inescapable. We have bought into such distraction about this UFO thing, even the term that you mentioned, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. Really? These are unidentified, now many identified, flying objects. It's a little more real.
Right.
But all the euphemisms, look, I'm not here to try to disturb the CIA in their dead-end agenda. I'd like to, just go on, do my little work, and have a nice time. Because what comes to the U.S. is also foretold in that document.
Yeah.
What comes to other places.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say that, I know that I think you and Billy Meyer have both made the distinction with, prophecy versus like prediction or something.
Prediction.
So you can change the prophecy. So what is, and I have been reading some of the stuff with France and everything, and we can get to that too. But for some of the stuff with the Finland and et cetera, was there a potential solution to avoid those kinds of conflicts?
Yeah, well, for the longest time, Billy, we also have a video out from years ago where Billy is saying, don't provoke Russia. I'm talking about like 2015, 2016.
Sure.
They have spoken for the longest time that the agenda of this country, actually, since its inception, it would work towards being a world ruler. And this isn't in our most, known public history and all, but Billy spelled it out. He's published tons of information going back to things about the formation of this country, the fact that George Washington literally murdered a French military person waving a white flag coming to bring an offer of peace, literally murdered the guy on the spot. It's stuff that's not in our, wonderful history that we try to cram into kids' heads in school. Of course, these days, we'll leave that alone. Right. So the way things could have been changed, people would have had to become a lot smarter than they are. They would have had to start paying attention and understanding things like the universal law of cause and effect. What goes up comes down. What goes out comes back. The law of the pendulum, whatever you want to call it.
Sure. Does this go back to the fall of the Soviet Union and how we had, made some guarantees about not advancing to
Yep.
Okay.
That's right.
All right.
Even before that, it goes back. The Meyer material goes back way before that. But here's the bottom line. This should be said at this point because it's rather strange. I remember and if you've been reading that document, towards the end of it, they talk about the computer-based weapons that will become no longer controllable, that will then turn against human beings. That's 1987. He's describing AI, laser, computer-controlled, biological, chemical things. So Billy Meyer and the people that I'll say it one last time and then I won't use it, allegedly meets with since he's been 5 years old, not only are space travelers, they are time travelers. They could not be giving Meyer, and he could not be witnessing certain things, literally witnessing events, past and future, without the ability for them to go forward or backwards in time. And this is so painfully obvious. Also, one of the last things in that 87 document, they spell out, he asks them, and Billy often asks questions he knows the answers to, but he wants them in the record from them, so that it isn't just like he's saying this. He asks them about Switzerland. What's going to happen with Switzerland in all of this? And they say to him, unfortunately, Switzerland is going to give up its neutrality and be misled to join into the EU, which is a dictatorship as well, and thereby invite ultimately aggression and attack from the long foretold since 1976 coalition alignment between primarily Russia and China and other countries that will join them. And one other thing is in this material. If and when this great war that America is pushing for, while they bankrupt this country and screw the people here, pushing for a war that we lose big time. We lose this war in part because there is a great chance, it's not 100% yet, but it's in those prophecies, that a race of extraterrestrials that is here will show its presence and join with those forces opposing the West. People should grasp that for a minute. It means more than likely, in my interpretation, these people that we're now starting to shoot at when we can see their craft,
right,
who are based underground, will be putting themselves at the service of the countries that this country continues to invade and create war against and overthrow government. This is going towards, we are in the first stages of technically a fourth world war. And we have a completely incompetent puppet, power-hungry puppet currently in the office. It doesn't, and we're non-political. I don't care. I've never cared about Republicans and Democrats. I would say at this point, within the past month or so, I said to myself, and I told a couple other people, more than likely Gavin Newsom is going to be the Democratic candidate. And I saw about a week after that, this is what I saw a video clip of Biden sitting there reading stuff with some people around him to his left and his right. To his left was Gavin Newsom, was the first person to his left. Yeah. Now, a lot of people could probably agree or disagree with this. If this comes to pass, In 2017, Billy put out a document with his own prophecies and predictions. And what's interesting about it is this: I tied it into something that happened in 2006. I was in Switzerland, and I was either in 2005 or 2006 that this happened. The video went up in 2006. I said to Billy, fundamentally, was the Iraq war about oil? And I know exactly where I was standing. He turns, sticks his index finger up in the air, and he says, no, fundamentally, it's about your dollar. And if things go a certain way, you may as well roll cigarettes with your paper money.
Oh, wow.
Bam.
Wow.
2017. No, that's 2006. Now, in 2017, he puts out these predictions stating that the agenda is going to be fulfilled. It's long been in place for a cashless society. Mm-hmm. People worldwide will be dispossessed and just saddled with monstrous debt. In 58, he foretold the biochipping that's coming. And he also said in there, the American people are in for a bad time. They will be dispossessed, and the government will turn the military and the police against the partly heavily armed population. So, can I prove that? No, but I think if we start to pay attention to what's happening, I mean, this country is going under. Now you've got Russia and China, and this, again, was foretold long ago. BRICS, Meyer was writing about, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa coalition. That's now in the news again. He wrote about it years ago. He says China is the next superpower, mm-hmm. and the BRICS alliance will be, the next big economic thing. The American, he said in 75. Wow. He said, and in 2012, he said, after 2020, there's a great possibility the superpower USA will cease to exist. Meaning, not that we're destroyed in 2020 or 21, but the superpower status will just be going. It's going to be, taken away. Now, when you have government people, such as we have throughout this country and in the federal government, who are run by entities like BlackRock and Vanguard and others, who people come in and tell them what the policy should be and what to do.
Right.
It doesn't bode well. And the reason this isn't a big conspiratorial thing is because it is so much in people's faces, and that's the best place very often to hide things, because people go, no, that can't be true. It's like today, for instance, I'm looking right now, I'm going to be putting up to blogs contact reports from Billy in which a guy had sent him more information about the so-called moon landing hoax. Now, that always sounds like a big conspiracy, except in 1958, 11 years before Apollo 11, Billy Meyer, all is freely available, folks. You don't have to go by Stephen Greer's nonsense films where he has no evidence or anything. It's free, and you can then check it out. Did it happen? Well, in 1958, Billy foretells, a bunch of these, moon landing attempts or moon landings, and he says one of them, the first one, will be hoaxed so that America can gain an upper hand on the Soviet Union and blah, 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 all this stuff. Well, of course, most people don't know that he foretold that, and that there's so much stuff in that document that other stuff that has verifiably come true. It's staggering. The new information, there are people that have put up a video that shows, it's a short video, and of course the military tried to debunk it and all, shows a rehearsal for that descent from the ladder onto the moon thing. But beyond that, they explained how it was done, what was done, how the artifact, let's say the lander and other, I could call them artifacts of the supposed moon landing, appear to be at that place, because Apollo 13, according to Meyer and his friends who had the ability to observe it all, Apollo 13 was not a big catastrophe mission. They went there with a lander and a flag and this and that to the area where this supposedly happened, and they put the stuff down. Now, let me acknowledge here, since you asked me the first question, I've been weaving through so much stuff because I want people to know that this is not just about UFOs. This is about our future survival, literally. And I, even in 2004, my own DVD on this was called The Meyer Contacts, the Key to Our Future Survival. And at this point, as you said, prophecies and predictions, most of the prophecies that are most important to us have now turned to predictions. They're inescapable. And it's not because I want them to be. I live here in America. It's not because, I hate the country. I don't. I think this is a gorgeous place that has been so ripped up and exploited. I saw, when I first got the first photo book in 1979, wow, this is real. This has got to be real because it's clearest photos you've ever seen. Clear stuff, a real investigation. In 1986, I meet a guy in Sedona, Arizona. We're talking. Billy Meyer comes up. He says, "Hey, have you read the conversation?" I said, "No. When you're back in LA, I'll give you the conversations." What that was, 800 pages, transcripts. Not the clearest English because they were translated by a guy who spoke German better, I'm sure, but 1,800 pages of these conversations where he asks them question after question after question, and they give him answer after answer after answer. And they also volunteer information where he isn't even thinking about it. What I saw in 1988, 2 years later, I opened a newspaper and there was a new article about a new discovery from Lawrence Livermore Laboratories in Northern California. And that discovery was that the ozone damage is tied in to atomic explosions, radiation, atomic testing, etc. And then when I looked at that new article with that new information, I said to myself, how come I already know this? I reached under the bed. 100 pages, the first block. Open it up, and there it is. She's telling him, this first contact person, is telling Meyer about the ozone damage, the percentages, the causes, the atomic. She says, in addition to what your scientists know about gases, which are very, very dangerous and still are, carbon dioxide and all this other stuff, methane, that's going to be huge because of the melting that they foretold of the permafrost. She says atomic radiation from the explosions of the bombs in Japan, from atomic tests that have gone on forever. Your world has been contaminated. Your ozone is damaged from this. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wait a minute. This is about something a little more important, actually, than UFOs. Sure, these days, because people have been largely turned into salivating puppies, dangle something above them that's glittery and shiny. Look, UAP, UFO, chase lights in the sky, you morons. You don't realize that if another race really exists and has been meeting with a human being since childhood for 81 years, maybe it's not about UFOs. We're not going to do anything. I can't do it. I've had 7, 8 sightings. I've been within 20 feet of one of the crafts from these people. I can't do anything with it, except, wow, that's interesting. Well, what's the point? The point is we'd like to get your attention through the UFOs, that a controversy gets started, that you start to dig, you start to learn to think for yourselves, and maybe you'll ultimately get out from under the thumb of your suppressive dictatorial governments and your completely greed, materialistic, power-hungry philosophies and people who run your world, and realize what life's about and how badly you have gone down the wrong path for the longest time.
Right.
And they have, they've been, look, I don't try to say these things to offend anybody, but they said, your religions have misled you so badly with imaginary tall tales and cults and imaginary beings, and people have for thousands of years, and many different ones, turned over your power and responsibility to outside forces, mainly imaginary, extraterrestrials. Now you want to turn over your powers to supposed extraterrestrials. This is not a survival-oriented thing. You're not alone in the universe. You have no concept of the magnitude of life in the universe at all stages of development. You're not the most advanced, certainly, and you're not the least advanced. You're just at a crossroads where you can now more than likely destroy yourselves and you have to go back and do it all over, you know?
Right, right.
We don't want that for you. I mean, these people have given us every possible, you know, people say, well, you know, we need free energy. Well, you know, I have a clip from 2011 with Billy explaining that type of energy. Well, of course it does exist. And there are people who've come upon how to do it, and they've been murdered usually, and the technology's destroyed. That is not your immediate solution. You could have endless, non-polluting alternative energy with something, if it was, you know, you have some of these on Earth, but it's deep geothermal, the clean form, not where you inject water into the Earth, because everything we do, fracking, sinkholes come from that. Extract. The next thing that I saw that got my attention in this material was when there was an article, a report by a scientist named Dr. Paul Siegel from Stanford University. This is back in, I think now this may have been 1990. Earthquakes, oil interact. And so this is, you're right?
Yep.
Well, but Meyer was told that in 76. We've been pounding away on this stuff. But, you know, I put up an article some years ago saying, look, I wouldn't really be that upset if I woke up tomorrow morning, Shell deep geothermal, they've abandoned all their polluting, dangerous, you know, oil drilling technology, and they converted wherever possible, and it's possible in lots of places, where they have deep geothermal, that creates the electricity, and have a nice day, we can breathe again. But no, they're going to wring the last drop of oil out of the earth at the cost of the tectonic stability everywhere, especially places. So this is, you know, what I would hope people would want to even say, this has got to be a hoax. It cannot be true. And I say, fine. You visit my blog. I have an old website. I've got tons. We already have all these predictions and prophecies that have been published verifiably. Look, this man, how does he get this ozone information? Somebody knows it. He couldn't have known it back, you know, in the day. He could not. He doesn't have the technology. How would he know in the 1970s and 80s what discoveries would be made on Mars about water on Mars? We hadn't gone to Mars. We had no equipment on Earth that could detect water on Mars. And it wasn't until these probes or landers would get to Mars that they would make the discoveries that literally confirmed what he published years and decades before. So here's a cherry on top of that. 2020, another trip I had made was up to the USGS, United States Geological Survey, because up there they are doing imaging on the Mars rover. And I saw an article in our local paper about a guy named Ken Herkenoff, a scientist in charge of that. Nice big bear of a guy grinning his face off. So I went up there and I asked to see him, you know, no appointment. I brought with me 3 pages of information I'd printed out on Mars and other planets and black holes and stuff. And he said, yeah, hi, how can I help you? I said, listen, I know you're doing this whole Mars thing. I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I'd like you to look at this information, and I'd appreciate a response from you when you have the time. Oh, sure, I'll do that. So he finally writes me back. Well, he literally says to me, could this guy be making lucky guesses? I said, well, Ken, I don't think so, because he's reading stuff in here that, you know, and so he tries to challenge, and he says, writes back again, he says, well, this thing from Billy Meyer from the 1980s about lightning on Mars. I've never heard of lightning on Mars. So I went online and I found NASA discovers, quote unquote, lightning on Mars in 2009, years and years after Meyer. So it goes on. Anything you could possibly. Okay. Last one. I promise I'll shut up because I know. Okay. In February 23rd, 2020, I received a document from Billy Meyer. Now, you know that the COVID thing had started sort of January, you know. And it's a 12-point page of ostensibly authored by these Pleiadian extraterrestrials, 12 points about this disease. And I'm not going to enumerate just for the sake of time because it's all up there.
Sure.
This is the first of a number of documents that I get on COVID. Every single thing in that document, and there were things like hidden spreaders. Children will be initially the main hidden spreaders. This is asymptomatic spreading. It'll go on not just for 4 weeks, as your scientists will think, but up to 3 months. It goes on and on, 12, and fills it out. Every single item, we published it on February 25th, 2020. As far as I know, I am the first person in America in English to publish as a statement of fact. There's no theories in here. Mm-hmm. This is a pandemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We now have over 40. There was just a new one I have to fill in online because there was a new corroboration about vaccine breakthroughs, meaning that people who are vaccinated can now, come down with this and that. Well, here's the thing. While I got this information beginning February 23rd, 2020, subsequently, and I've continued to receive things, and it's all been accurate, all published before WHO, all published before CDC. They released some document information from 1947 and 48. 47 and 48. Meyer is 10 and 11 years old, or 10 and 12 years old, something like that. 10, 11. And in it, he is describing this coming disease in great detail. He describes the vaccine breakthrough. I mean, they used these terms back then, right? So he did another thing in the 40s. He foretold who would actually be the persons actually responsible for this disease. And it's not Bill Gates, and it's not Anthony Fauci. They may be complicit with their profiteering off of, what they just discovered also was that these vaccines, the initial vaccines, a lot of them were placebos. They were salt water and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And that was just in the news. And he published that one, I think it was back in the 40s. But what he published also back then was that the two people who would be behind this disease would be a Chinese dictator named Mao Zedong and a humiliated prominent American named Richard Milhous Nixon, former president of the United States. And that they would also be supported by an evangelist named Billy Graham. Now, of course, none of this is in the news. Nobody will ever talk about that. They won't want to discover that. Meyer in 2019 already had said this came out of the Wuhan lab. Mm-hmm. We published information from him already going back to the 90s where he foretold the SARS epidemic, which would be a precursor to this. All of the people do not understand. If you waste your time with the government or so-called UFO experts who babble on about things that they really have no firsthand knowledge of and no firsthand evidence of, you're going to be playing the game that is not going to serve you well as the economy is collapsed, as the droughts continue, as the increase in global warming and all the other things, as the volcanoes in Italy and other places become super active, as the volcanoes in Italy that were specifically foretold to become active in 2017 when certain earthquakes would take place. Now, I've just said something, what is that supposed to mean? In 1948, Meyer's second teacher put in writing the names of the 5 volcanoes and specifically stated between 2015 and 17 in central Italy, these powerful earthquakes will take place. Well, that document has been out for some time. And I searched, those earthquakes took place in central Italy. They were called the strongest on record. And each of those volcanoes has now had some activity. Meyer also was the first person to foretell the eruption of Cumbre Vieja, which may not be over yet either. It goes on and on. As I said, 250 plus of these things, not to entertain us, not to distract us, to try to wake us up that each person is going to be better realize that we are responsible for ourselves, and that these people that we think have our best interests at heart, of course, really don't. And it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum you're on. So
Oh.
I will apologize if there was too much there and it went to too many places. But people could replay this and focus in on something here and there and challenge it or ask me where it is or go to the blog and search. So let me stop for a while.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Mao Nixon, I mean, is what Billy is saying is the roots of engineered disease go back then.
Yes.
Wow.
And he said, here's the other thing, that Mao, it never came into fruition while Mao was alive. It was picked up and put into secret labs. And what they made very clear is that the Chinese government itself was not behind this. Now, think about it for a second. If the Chinese government had been behind it now, Mao, apparently Nixon, he wanted to use it against America. That's what Nixon's agenda was. He wanted revenge. For those people that don't know anything about Richard Nixon, you look up the whole thing. This was a very vengeful guy anyhow.
Right.
He was known as Tricky Dick and all this stuff. And so this is the story from this material dating back to the 40s. And so what happens is it gets taken up into secret labs there. And if it had been a Chinese government operation, strictly speaking, I doubt that the Chinese people would have lost hundreds of thousands or millions of people under the first quote-unquote attack, which was, as Meyer also said, was responsible for SARS getting out. Right. These were lab accidents. The first one was in Guangdong, China, and this was in Wuhan. So, the real world is in many ways worse than the conspiracy theories.
Wow.
Which often take you off. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to cover. The thing about France, because I was reading that post. The thing is, like, there's been tensions with the Muslim community in France for a while, and you've got the issue with immigration and that stuff. But I was kind of surprised when I was reading this that it was falling to radical Islam when, as far as I was aware, the recent turmoil all stemmed from the changes to the pension. So are you saying that they're going to use that crisis and kind of subvert it, or is Billy?
Well, sure. Even if you get into some of the news clips that are mainly, I think, alternative news stuff online, there are clips from radical Muslims. And Meyer was very clear about something, and because people will take this maybe the wrong way, there are people in each and every religion, lots of them, who are not radical, who are not revolutionaries, who are not terrorists. And there are people in each religion who go to the extremes. And he was very clear about, yes, radical Islamists. Now, there are even quotes online. You can see people saying, we're now going to take over. Recent video clips. Remember, all of the stuff with radical Islam and the fomenting of it goes back to the Crusades and all this. Oh, yeah. This goes way back. Now, Merkel, and they had foretold this either in the 40s or 50s, that there would be a deranged woman in Germany who would open the floodgates to the invasion of Europe by asylum seekers, many of whom would be criminals and terrorists, not simply people trying to save their lives, economic opportunists and all. Their position on any kind of illegal immigration is people who genuinely have a fear for their lives. They're being terrorized or something, and they flee. That's an understandable thing. They're trying to protect themselves and their families. Economic migration is a betrayal of the responsibility to people's countries, their own countries, when they flee and they go into another country to take advantage of the developments that the citizens of those countries have made through their own hard work and toil. If you are going to certainly want to go to another country, then the first act should not be to break the laws of that country. Now, because we are polarized in this country with some very strange ideas, and I wasn't intending to talk about it, but there there actually are two genders. It might not be very comfortable for people who've been saturated by leftist educational systems. There are two genders, and people who are free to express their preferences in their behaviors, their attractions, their sexual behavior. We cannot make a man into a woman, and we cannot make a woman into a man. But let people, Meyer's information is about this. Every human being is of equal value, has equal rights to live their life, so long as they are not doing harm unto others. Mm-hmm. I mention this because I've got a friend also of over 50 years who's a retired physician who has sent me the craziest stuff endorsing something that is child mutilation. Now, anybody that can think right, look, I went to a school that I thought had, really good teaching in it. I was there for a short period of time in Chicago. They were a very good school, and I think they based a lot of things on good thinking and logic. It's called Francis Parker. And they recently, a few months ago, were in the news because one of their teachers was busted for, with a group of young students passing around some sexual toy stuff and I could not imagine that this school had given rise to such a, in my opinion, degeneration. And then I also remembered that I went to school with at that same school, there was a guy in another grade. I knew him very briefly. His name was Nicky Pritzker. The governor of Illinois is one of his brothers, I think, and or his uncle, something like that. And the brother of the governor is a man who's now a woman. And they fund all of this gender stuff, which is people have to understand this is an over $2 billion a year industry. So how did you get to that from the Billy Meyer? We've lost our minds. It's just that simple. And in politics and religion, to me, are the twin evil siblings that destroy logic, self-determination, reason, and love, and always create a wake of violence and conflict behind them, as well as push one forward. So, maybe this should have been several conversations about this and that and all, but yeah, it's almost like I'm trying to plead with people to wake up. And I would say to you, go ahead and approach this material. Even if you have the intention to disprove it, it's fine. Just do something to find out what the heck's,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting the next few months because of all the push that's been coming up with the military, and I'm curious to see if they're going to try to push the invasion, theories further. Listening to some of the stuff, the Gavin Newsom thing that you said is interesting because I was not thinking that. It'll be interesting. I don't know if that's a Billy Meyer thing or just your personal.
No.
Okay.
No, I just see it. Yeah, it's just me. This guy is so smooth and so slick, and just say this since we revisited that and tied into he was interviewed, I believe, by Sean Hannity. I just happened to see like 2 minutes where Hannity asks him about this gender thing and why is it fair for a 6'4" male to swim against women who are 100 pounds less and all that. And he goes into this compassion for people. There's no compassion for the women athletes. I put up a blog, I don't know, last year. I said, look, the whole thing could be solved with this trans and sports thing. There's a category for biological men, a category for biological women, a category for trans men, a category for trans women, and we just respect everybody's reality, if you will, in that way. Yeah. You don't put a guy in. Look, I could suddenly decide I identify with being a banker. Well, I'm coming in to start running this bank because I identify with it. It's so bizarre that we have allowed ourselves to be tricked into this gibberish without question. And meanwhile, Russia and China have just gone into a long foretold alliance. Mm-hmm. It's a financial. We are just frittering away. Oh my gosh, what's wrong with people?
Yeah.
So please, Yeah.
Yeah, I think it feeds the division, and I think that's what this is all about. I think you're spot on with the politics and religion, because even though I believe in spirituality, organized religion, that, like you said, it makes you give up your, you're basically looking to someone else to give you answers, but you're looking at
Yep.
a human, and so you're following a failed or a flawed individual instead of a spirituality where you can go and look inside and try to do something more that's outside the realm of humanity. So whenever you do that, you fall into potential manipulation by the powers that be. But yeah, we've covered a lot, and unfortunately, this is the result of being having talked to you for a couple of years, I believe. So we will have to get more follow-ups on here to go into some of the deeper dives into some of this. Anything else as we come up on the hour here?
Well, there is so much, and you just mentioned the most important part. The core of this material is not UFOs. It's actually not even prophecies. It's what's called a teaching, a creation, energy, spiritual, whatever term you want to use, teaching. And that means it's just the same as if I want to learn how to fix a car, study plants, anything. I get a book. It doesn't tell me what to believe. It gives me information and tells me how to proceed to see if I get the results. So the teaching in this case is said to be beyond ancient. It is the same teaching essentially that the Plejaren and other advanced people study. It was brought to us for the purpose of our having access to it, that we might get out from underneath the domination of false teachings, religions, cults, belief systems. There's about 45,000 at least on Earth, and determine for ourselves what's true. So if I read a book from Meyer, which just brilliant books, The Might of the Thoughts is stunning. He also teaches things that, strangely enough, we might call them the negatively intended parties know some of this stuff because they know how to attain what they want without, however, conscience and consciousness, just, selfish power hunger. The teaching itself liberates when one applies it and tests it. And that's what they came to bring. And that's what the whole thing is truly about, not chasing lights in the sky.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you, Michal Horn, for coming back on Packets and Bolts. We'll look forward to the next conversation.
Sure, and I want to share this with all my audience around the world as well. So when you have a link, you'll send it to me, and I'll be grateful. Mm-hmm. And I'll be very happy if you and your listeners have any questions. We could do this again. People can email whatever they want to do. They can go to the They Fly blog and have a party. So I thank you again, and I do hope we'll do this more frequently than we, have been able to in the past. I like your approach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. That was Michal Horn returning for the second time on Packets and Bolts. Remember to email the show, packetsandbolts@gmail.com, packetsandbolts@gmail.com. If you have questions for any follow-up interviews with Michal Horn or anything else that you want to do with the show, find us on Discord, Mastodon, anywhere else that's out there. We will, as we hear the chimes, we will be setting off for this episode of July 17th, 2023. Remember, keep packing those bolts, and until next time, see ya. Real goat.